All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Pacific Science Center's Science in the City Lecture Series. My name is Anna, and I'll be your host and moderator for this evening. Welcome to tonight's event. This is actually our February event of the Global Health and Development Series. It was rescheduled from February due to the snowpocalypse that we had. So thank you all who reserved tickets for that evening and then showed up again tonight. We're happy to be able to reschedule it. So tonight's event is part of our Global Health and Development Series. It takes place the second Tuesday of every month, and it's put on with generous support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Washington Global Health Alliance. So thank you to them, and thank you all for joining us this evening. We've got a wonderful and enlightening evening for you all tonight, and shortly I'll introduce our speaker and hand it over to her to begin her presentation. The talk portion of the evening will last about 45 minutes, and after that, we'll have about 30 minutes of Q&A. But before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to give a few housekeeping announcements and let you know about an upcoming event. So first, a special thank you to our Pacific Science Center members in the audience. Members enjoy all Science in the City events for free or at a discount, along with countless other benefits like free IMAX films, planetarium shows, and members-only events. If you're interested in membership and you're not a member already, please feel free to come talk with me after the event, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit more. If you do need to leave at any time, please do so through the exit to your left via the wooden doors. The restrooms are at the bottom of the stairs or at the bottom of the elevator, and you can re-enter through the blue doors. Feel free to also step over to our catering booth over here to my left and grab a glass of wine or a beer or a soda if you'd like. We do have some surveys for you this evening, so you might have picked one up on your way in. If you did, thank you. We highly value your feedback on these events, and we use them to both share information with our partners and help shape future events. If you can take a few minutes at the end of tonight's event and complete those, we greatly appreciate it, and you can drop them off in the tray on your way out over by these wooden doors. And finally, our next Global Health and Development event is just 1 week away on Tuesday, April 9th. We'll hear from Dr. Dorothy Ikodu of Pilgrim, Africa, for her presentation called Eradicating Malaria, the Big Fight Against Little Mosquitoes. So if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, and I'm sure you will, I highly recommend that you check out next week's too, for a scientific but very personal account of Dorothy's organization's work combating malaria in Uganda. To give you an idea of what's in store at the event, here's a snippet that Dorothy shared with us about her work. She said, "My journey in malaria control has been about science and intellectual discovery, about the tough truths of real friendship, about humility and faith. I've never worried that humans won't solve the tough problem of malaria. What has worried and challenged me at the deepest levels is the question of whether and when Africa, and especially those countries in Africa with the highest levels of disease, will be at the forefront of that solution. The most humbling part of my work has been learning what doesn't help." So please join us next week to learn more about her story and what exactly Dorothy has learned doesn't help. Okay, and finally on to tonight's event. I'm honored to introduce Pat Garcia-Gonzalez, Chief Executive Officer of the Max Foundation. And I'm particularly delighted to introduce Pat tonight because Pacific Science Center recently expanded our access initiatives to a new focus on girls and women in STEM. We're committed to helping address and break down barriers to science, technology, engineering, and math. And two of the ways we're doing that is by increasing the visibility of women role models and promoting the achievement of women. And as you're about to hear in Pat's bio, Pat's been involved in some really incredible work, and we're really excited to feature her as we kick off this new initiative. All right, for more than 20 years, Pat Garcia-Gonzalez has been dedicated to improving the lives of cancer survivors around the world. A native of Argentina, Pat has a master's degree from the University of Washington and a technical degree in nursing. Pat is the co-founder of the Max Foundation, started in 1997 in honor of her stepson, Max. Max was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia at the age of 14. He survived until the age of 17, and his legacy lives on in the hearts of thousands of cancer survivors whose lives have been touched by the organization. Under Pat's direction since 2005, the Max Foundation is dedicated to increasing global access to treatment, care, and support for people living with cancer. To date, the organization has helped more than 80,000 patients in 72 low and middle income countries get life-saving cancer medicine. The organization carries out its daily work in partnership with a global network of 450 physicians and 70 patient associations. Pat has played an integral role in expanding access to treatment and diagnostics by developing a robust delivery system to support access solutions. So please join me in welcoming Pat to the stage.
Let's try again.
Ten years ago, I climbed Mount Kinabalu, but I realized it was so tough to climb, and I came back and went straight to KL to check my body because I knew something was wrong, and that's how I found out I have CML. So last year, Pat came to Singapore and met me, and we had a video interview. And then she suddenly had an idea, because since I've been doing this fundraising thing during my birthday every year, why don't I make it a mountain climb for the next one? I'm like, that's an amazing idea. And this is why we see all of us here. This is how my story started, and I want to close that loop. That this is how I started 10 years ago, and now I want to finish it.
Tomorrow we can start, we can do the second half.
I'm being a hot tea now. Thank you guys. Highest mailbox in Malaysia. Highest mailbox. Sending love from Mount Kinabalu.
Oh my gosh, we're so close.
Hardest thing I've ever done. Still not as hard as fighting leukemia though, but never thought I'd do that.
Amazing. Finally, third time. I made it!
Come, give me 5.
Yeah!
Thank you so much, and thank you for the Pacific Science Center for having me today. I'm Pat, and this is my friend Tony from Malaysia. And at the Max Foundation, we walk alongside patients in their cancer journey, literally. Even when that takes us up a mountain, even when we have no business being up a mountain because we haven't trained at all. But you know, nobody trains to be a patient, and nobody should do it alone. So that's what we do. Tony was 25 when he was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia, and you heard him say CML. Max was 14, as Anna said. When Max was diagnosed in 1988, we were told there was no treatment. We were told if we were lucky, we would find a donor for a transplant. And if he was lucky, he would survive the transplant. But we weren't, and he didn't. When Tony was diagnosed in 2005, things had changed. And now there was this great treatment for chronic myeloid leukemia. They called it the magic cancer bullet, because this is an amazing treatment. You take a pill every day, and you can live with your leukemia in remission for many years. So he was told that there was this treatment. He was also told that it was extremely expensive and that he had to take it for the rest of his life. So, but by then we had started the Max Foundation in 1997 to connect patients with resources for cancer. And we sort of came of age as an organization in the early 2000s by entering into a partnership with the company that had made that magic cancer bullet to be able to facilitate access around the world in low and middle income countries to people like Tony that would otherwise not have been able to afford it. So he was eventually connected with us and we were able to give him treatment. And so he has really been in treatment for 12 years now. I knew of Tony as I know of a lot of our patients. I was told that he is a musician, that he's a songwriter, and that he had written a song dedicated to myself and to Max. And so I wanted to know his story. I wanted to hear his journey. And so on this day, a couple of years ago, I went to Malaysia to interview him, and so he told me his journey. And so he said, as he was trying to explain in the video, that he was trying to climb this mountain with some friends, and that's when he realized something's wrong with his body. He came down the mountain. He couldn't reach the summit, and was diagnosed with CML. And so, of course, I had to say, oh, okay, we're doing this together then. And so sooner than I knew, 23 people, several of my colleagues, some of our partners, and 6 patients went in that 2-day mountain climb, and you can see that he made it finally 12 years later up the mountain. I digress, but I tell you, I don't know if you guys are mountain climbers, but obviously I'm not. It was my first mountain climb. And there was this moment in the climb, I was climbing with one of my colleagues, and you go at your own pace for many, many hours, and thinking about the patient journey, and you can't quit because patients don't quit. And so we spent about 2 hours with my colleagues debating in detail what was harder, if climbing this mountain or childbirth. We're both mothers, so it took a lot of our time and our mind out of the thing. But anyway, I digress. At the Max Foundation, we have been walking alongside patients for 20 years, and I have learned a lot about trying to bring access to treatment to cancer in low and middle income countries. So I put together this presentation, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to just share with you guys what I have learned. I've given this presentation a couple of times, and first I did the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the ugly is so ugly that it really ends in a really low point. So I will do it backwards. I'll start with the ugly, go to the bad, and then we can end with the good in a little bit of a better place. Because the ugly is ugly, and maybe many of you know that there are many, many millions of people around the world diagnosed with cancer. Some people call it a global cancer epidemic. The number of cancer patients diagnosed is going up really quickly, a little bit because we're better at treating other diseases, a little bit because we are also better at sharing our sort of bad habits that make cancer more prevalent. Unfortunately, 7 out of 10 people diagnosed with cancer live in countries where they have no access to cancer treatment. 7 out of 10. So the ugly is ugly and it's difficult. I have identified myself 12 countries today where there is no access to, no possibility of treating any cancer, not just some cancer, any cancer, at least 12. Entire countries of entire populations of people that are being diagnosed and are dying without treatment and without pain medicine. So the ugly is very difficult, and it's a reality that many of us are trying to overcome. I think that little by little we're making a little bit of progress. But I'll go to the bad, and the bad is that it's complicated. There is a reason why it's not easy to solve, because it's very complicated. It's not just one problem. So, for instance, a lot of governments, just like the government of this country, does not provide reimbursement for cancer treatment. So patients have to pay out of pocket any treatment that they need. Many countries, just like our country here, doesn't have access to universal health care. And so people are left behind, and they are diagnosed, they need a cancer treatment, and they cannot afford it. In some countries, the government does provide health care, but the treatments that they provide are in some kind of a national list. Well, all the innovative cancer treatments do not make it into the national list. So people in these countries have absolutely no way to access treatments. Then there's the issue of private insurance. We know that so well in the United States, right? We have private insurance, but it doesn't cover the treatment I need. So how do I afford it? You know, with Tony, unless we brought that access program to him, there was no way that he could possibly afford. I had a patient in Paraguay who was told by her doctor when she was diagnosed in Spanish, but I'll translate, even if you sell your soul to the devil, you will never be able to afford this treatment, right? Some people, this is the United States, have private insurance. Insurance covers it, but there's a copay, and there's no possibility to afford the copay. This is a problem in the United States every day today. Some patients lack insurance, right? And so if you totally don't have insurance and your government does not reimburse, there is no way that you can afford to buy these medicines. And people know, I mean, I often say that I think there's only one thing worse than hearing that your loved one has cancer, and it's to hear that there is a treatment, but you can't have it. I think that is the most cruel thing that can happen to somebody. And this next one is one that I have seen too many times, that people can afford only for a few months. And so I have seen people that are diagnosed with cancer, they sell everything they have to buy the few first months of treatment, and then they have to abandon treatment, and they die and leave their families with nothing. And I think that that is something that should not happen. And yes, I know I'm building a wall. I understand it's a wall. My wall can be for the other wall. So I'm just saying, if you notice, this is a wall that we are trying to bring down today. I have to say this because I didn't know this before I started working in this field. Most drugs that are developed today for cancer, especially the innovative ones, the best ones, are not registered in most countries in the world. So if you're a pharmaceutical company and you come up with a treatment, a drug, the first thing you have to do is go and register it with the health authorities, and the health authorities have to sort of authorize you to have this treatment in this country. They're not even registered. So even if you had a lot of money, you cannot access it. It's not in most countries in the world. Most drugs are not just not available. And then there are some other countries where the companies register the product, but then they decide they're not going to commercialize it. They're not going to sell it. Nobody will sell it. So even if you have the money, you cannot buy it. So there is no way that you can access the treatment that you need. So we deal with donations, for all those countries and all those medicines that are not registered in the countries. Then we say, okay, if you're not going to register it, so let us bring it to the patients that need it. Well, there are some governments that tell us that it's illegal to donate medicine to a patient, and they stop us from trying to help a patient in their country. And then there's the other governments who were trying to bring the donated medicines to a country, and the governments don't like it because they see these expensive medicines coming in, but because they're not going to be sold, they have no commercial value. And so then they cannot charge a tax. So then they decide, oh, we're going to impose a tax. So now we are trying to bring the medicines to their patients that they are not helping. We are trying to help them, but they want us to pay a very large tax. All the paperwork, and this is a very regulated field, so importation of medicines is a very complicated thing to do. And so you can think like Tony, a person like Tony, he has to be on this medicine for the rest of his life. So every time Tony goes to the clinic, we have to make sure there's medicine for him. And so that cycle of making sure that we have medicine in the country every time, in the clinic for Tony, it's interrupted sometimes because things get stuck in customs. For, I have our colleague in South Africa calls it a customs clearance event that lasts, I don't know, from one day to a week to a month, that things get stuck in customs. Oops, and now I turned it off. Oh, Josue. This is why Josue is here, because I ruined it. Thank you. No, Josue, we have to start the wall again. Okay, you guys. I'm not going to repeat all this. It is a very heavy burden that we have to overcome to try to help people have access to treatment. And this is the reality. Where were we? Here. It's very cumbersome, right? We are bringing medicines from, let's say, Europe or the US. We have to bring it to a country that has a very weak infrastructure. The health authorities in the US and in Europe tell us, well, you have to comply with our safety requirements. So the clinics in the other country, in the recipient country, need to be at the same level and need to meet the standards. And it's very difficult for them to meet the standards that we need. So sometimes, in order to provide patient safety, we're not allowed to bring it into the country. A lot of those countries in the ugly list are countries that don't have a clinic, that have the sort of infrastructure that the health authorities in Europe or in the US would think is appropriate for us to bring medicines. And then there is, sometimes companies do want to help, and then they don't have a pathway. They don't know from a regulatory perspective to make sure they can do it legally. They really literally can't. And so that sometimes prevents us from being able to help a patient. This is one that also I think is something that I really want to work on. We come with our program, we have really high quality drugs with a really high quality program, and what we want is for that to be a bridge until the government of that country is ready and able to help the patients. We don't want to give these donations forever. So when the governments take over and when the governments are ready to take the program, they buy the lowest quality drugs, they have the lowest quality procedures, and they make it so difficult for patients. One day they have drug, next day they don't. They tell the patient to come back. They tell the patient that they don't have medicine for them that day. And so it's very difficult for people to really stay on their treatment. And then there's the whole diagnostics situation. So as we maybe you have heard in cancer, we talk about personalized medicine, right? So these new drugs are great. They attack this mutation in the cells. Well, you have to find the mutation before you know what patient needs to take it. And in most countries, you're not able to have those capabilities to diagnose. So even when we have the drugs, it's very difficult to actually have access to the diagnostics. Then we work really hard and we bring the machines and the instruments to the countries. Well, then the governments are not able to afford the reagents, the actually things you need to actually run the diagnostic. So that's the next problem that we have. And I know maybe you're as exhausted as I am. It's a very big wall of problems. I think it feels very heavy to me when I go through it. But I think that that is the whole point. That the reason that there is so much work to do and the reason that it's so difficult is because there's just all sorts of problems that make it very difficult, even for those of us who are really, really trying to help. So the patients end up having to pay for the diagnostics and the tests. Well, the patients don't have the money to pay for the test. They're going to come, you're going to give them this very expensive drug for free. They don't have the money to pay for the test. They don't have the money to pay for the hospital consult. They don't have the money for the bus. You know, in many countries, there is one cancer center in the entire country. You know, we think here, we get sick, we go to the Hutch, we go to the CCA, right? In many countries, people travel a day and a half, they travel 2 days, and they don't have the money. One of my colleagues in India was telling me the other day, she called the patient. The Max Foundation is a small organization. There's about 70 of us in total in the world, 20 of us here, 50 around the world. But we are pretty mighty, I think. Our team has about 10,000 one-on-one contacts with patients a month. So they're constantly calling patients and trying to make sure they're staying on treatment, that they come back to the clinic. And so she knew of a patient that hadn't come back to the clinic, and she called him and said, hey, you need to go see your doctor and get your medicine. And he said, I don't have the $2 for the bus, and so I can't come. And she said, well, maybe the doctor can help you. And the gentleman really was very proud and did not want the doctor to help him. And he said, no, I have to do this on my own. I don't want that to happen. And so then a few days later, she heard from the doctor that the man had come. So she called him again and said, hey, so you made it. How did you do it? He had sold his bicycle. He sold the bicycle, which was the only method of transportation he had, so he could come up with the $2, so he could take the bus, so he could go get the medicine. So this is what makes it so hard when sometimes we think it's all about, drugs are too expensive. Yes, they're too expensive. But there's a lot more going on in the background that we have to solve. Patients cannot afford a place to stay close to the hospital. And so we see them, they come from the village, they have to be all day at the hospital, they can't go back home in the same day, they need a place to stay. They can't afford to do that. They cannot afford to take a day off of work. So if you are a daily wage laborer, a person that you work today, you make money today, you don't work today, you don't make money today. So, they can't afford to not work once every 3 months or once every however many months they have to come back to the doctor. People just abandon treatment because they can't afford it. And this is one that sometimes we don't think about. In many countries, there's a huge stigma of cancer. There's stigma because most people with cancer die. That's where the stigma comes from, right? So people don't want to hear about cancer. So people can't say that they have cancer because they get immediately fired from their jobs and abandoned by their families. And so if you cannot tell your employer that you're sick, how do you ask for the day off? You can't. And so people, even when you have the treatment for them and you overcome all this wall of problems, then sometimes they abandon treatment just because they can't tell anyone. And the last one, just one more. This is, I think, very difficult for some of us to understand, as Anna was talking about women. In many cultures, women do not control the decision-making about their health care. It is the males of the family that will decide if that woman should go and get treatment. And so many times families decide it's too much, and so they abandon the woman, or they decide they're not going to treat her. So this is the bad wall of problems that we have to overcome. This is my friend Hisham. And Hisham is from Sudan. And Hisham represents a lot of the issues that I just talked about. So Hisham also was diagnosed with a different cancer that also needed that magic cancer bullet. So we were able to help him. And we knew that he in Sudan was doing a lot of volunteer work. We have a lot of our patients are doing a lot of volunteer work in their communities. And so we try to give them, build capacity and help them start the volunteer work that they're doing. So on this day in 2012, we had brought about 10 different, we call we leaders, from different countries in Africa to Tanzania to this meeting. It was the first time I met Hisham. We were around the table, so I said, let's introduce each other. And so he stood up and he said, my name is Hisham, I'm 34. I am the father of 2 little girls. When I was diagnosed 2 years ago and was told I needed this medicine, I sold my house to buy the first month of supply that I needed. And then I ran out of money. And then somebody told me about the Max Foundation, and I was able to access treatment. But what really touched me about him, a very sweet young guy, was that he wasn't mad or resentful or angry that he had sold everything to have to buy. He was so grateful that he had decided to dedicate the rest of his life to help other people in Sudan. And so when a year later I was told by one of my colleagues that this medicine was no longer working for him, and he needed the next line of treatment that was made by another pharmaceutical company. We said, by then we had been working, this was 2014, we had been working for many years, we knew a lot of our patients, and this was happening to us. Some of our patients were needing other treatments. And so we had this one big partnership with this one big pharma company that was giving the drug. But when our patients needed other treatments, we would go to the other companies and they would say, no, 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 we can't help. But we never gave up. When Hisham got sick and needed that drug, we said, we're going. We're going, and we try to be very smart. We always try to be as smart as we can. And we made our case and we explained to this company that he really was our friend, that he really needed our help. And they said, okay, we will help your friend. It was a moment. And then we went into 4 or 5 months of hundreds of teleconferences and phone calls and emails back and forth because this company in the United States did not have a pathway. That was one of the bricks. They didn't have a legal way in which they could send drugs to Sudan for Hisham. But they were really, really trying. And at the end, they said, okay, we'll send it to Egypt. And then from Egypt, somehow it's going to get to Sudan. So the drug got to Sudan. It got to Sudan the day before Hisham died. And we were very traumatized. And they were very traumatized in the pharmaceutical company because they really tried. And so, I asked myself, what can I do? You ask yourself, what can I do? I knew at that moment what I could do. Because I said to myself, there's a whole brick of problems out there. But if I know that a company wants to help a patient, I never want to know again that there's no way for them to help. We knew enough about managing other people's programs. So in 2015, we said, we are going to create the channels. We are going to create our own channel into all these countries so that for any company that wants to give the drug to some patient, we're going to be able to help. And so that is what we did, and that is part of the good. And there is a lot of good. We talked about all the ugly and all the bad, but there is a lot of good. Not only us, there's many organizations doing a lot of work. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what we are doing. No sound. My technical assistant person. Wait. Why there's no sound?
Cancer is on the rise. By 2030, the number of new cancer patients diagnosed each year will double to more than 23 million worldwide. But the vast majority of those people, 7 out of 10, will be concentrated in under-resourced countries with no way to access the treatment they need. At the Max Foundation, we believe everyone deserves access to cancer treatment, no matter who they are or where they live. So, as gaps in cancer care grow wider, we build bridges across them and deliver life-saving medication directly into the hands of patients. Here's how we do it. Whenever a patient is diagnosed with cancer and prescribed an out-of-reach medication, a global system of collaborations is activated, beginning with a doctor in our network. We secure a continuous supply of donated medicine, manage the shipping process from end to end, and provide wraparound support for that patient and their community, strengthening the local healthcare system in the process. Whether as a partner, donor, advocate, or friend, you can be part of the solution. You can help people access the life-saving medication they need. Together, we can bring all people dignity and hope through access to treatment. The Max Foundation, dignity and hope in the face of cancer.
And that is what we try to do. I think that those two words, dignity and hope, I call myself a cancer advocate. As cancer advocates, sometimes we have to watch ourselves because we think we can make anything happen in the world. And sometimes we have to remember we are not God. Sometimes we help somebody, we give them everything. Cancer is still too strong, and sometimes we lose that person. But we do our best to make sure that people know that if there is a treatment, they can have it, and they can have the hope for them and their families. And this is Carmen. And Carmen is from the Philippines. And Carmen is another one of those patients who, for many years, took this magic cancer bullet in the Philippines. And a couple of years ago, needed another treatment. But by now, we had the way. And so we had already been working not only with one company, but with more companies. And we were able to give them the treatment that she needed. When we went to meet her, she told us when she started relapsing, she found out that we can give her this other treatment, she had sewn her dress for her funeral because she didn't want to bother her family. And then we rescued her for the second time. And so some people say, who cares about Carmen? I mean, why help her? Why do we do all this and all this work to help her? But she is the rock of her family. She is retired. She stays and takes care of the grandson, so her son and the daughter-in-law can go to work. And so when you help a patient, you're not just helping a person, you're really helping a family, you're helping a community. Even the physicians that work with us tell us so many times that our patients are the only ones they are able to treat successfully. And so, how do you want to be an oncologist or a hematologist that can never, ever treat somebody successfully? It's very difficult. So I think that the work they do with us gives them hope and helps them keep going in their everyday, efforts to cure people. So this is what we have done in 2018. We delivered about 4 million doses of medication to patients in 72 countries. That's the scope of what we're doing. We are working, these are the countries where we're working. We have a pretty big footprint. We don't do this alone. There is no way the Max Foundation, Little Max Foundation, can do this alone. So, we work with our doctors in the 72 countries who are really the ones that are the heroes of the story. We work now with 5 different companies, and we have access to 8 different products for our patients. We work with a company that does all the distribution and shipping and logistics for us. And then we do what we do best, which is provide that wraparound support, that emotional support, education, awareness to the patients. So I think the message I want to give you is that, you know, we all have to work together, and that together we really can make a difference. So here's the last video of today.
The Scoville Experience is an opportunity for us to bring partners and supporters closer into our work. We want them to get the chance to see firsthand how they can make a difference in the lives of cancer patients.
Here we go, Max Foundation. Let's do this.
Within our organization, if we look at the demographics of our patients, most of our patients are from Africa. When you put your feet down in African soil, you can feel the vibration of life traveling through your body. We wanted our partners to come here and experience that, because then they know we have to change it, not for the 5,000 patients we are currently helping, but for the 10,000, 15 or 20,000 we are currently not reaching.
My name is Ahmed Awad. Once I know that I'm cancer patient, I asked myself and I asked God, I look at the sky, why me? I was 24 years old, I'm so young. So I'm asking myself, why me? What I did in my life? Why my life stopped now?
My name is Bahija Gwimi.
My name is Hiba Nashid.
I was very afraid to lose my family, and especially my kids, because they are everything in my life. I remember they start crying and they, you know, cancer is dead and mom will go.
My name is Gershon from Ghana. If it's leukemia, nothing, no amount of money would save me. So I left myself that I should die. That is basically what I did.
Sometimes you want to give up, and but when I see the first box, this is, for me, it's not only a box of tablets or pills or medication. For me, it's the future.
I tried it, and within a certain short time, I think 2 weeks or so, I started feeling better. The joint pains, everything started becoming normal. Then there I said, hi, this medicine is going to work for me.
Partnerships are critical to the work that we do. When we work together with partners, we learn more, we advance more, we increase our opportunities, and we have definitely better outcomes for patients everywhere.
Our partnership with the Max Foundation has been truly a transformational experience for both organizations. It began over 15 years ago with the concept of providing access to a breakthrough medicine for CML in the low-income world, something that had never really been done before. And since that time, we have both continued to learn and work together to reach more patients. Actually, more than 75,000 people have benefited from the partnership.
We got a call from the Max Foundation probably over a decade ago to donate some product. We did so once we learned who Max is and what they were about. And then over time we got on the phone and had more conversations about what they were doing, and it really became an inspiration and a challenge for our company to be able to assist them as an NGO pioneering the pharma space.
CEVID and the Max Foundation, it's a little bit of a match made in heaven from my point of view, because I think the goals of the two organizations are the same. It's allowing everyone in the world, no matter what their financial status is or where they live, to have access to the diagnostics and the drugs that can help them. It really comes down to accessibility.
these people are people. They're not just patients. They are not their disease. They are not the place they're from. They all have the same dreams that I do. They all have the same hopes that I do. They all have the same fears that I do. They just want more time with their family.
I love my family, and I am very happy to have them because they support me. They give me much love. We laugh about our cancer, but I am very friend with my cancer because he allows me to see the life and to see other people and to see how amazing is my life.
The Max Foundation.
Dignity and hope
in the face
of cancer.
Thank you. So I ask all of you to ask yourselves, what can I do? Is our solution the only solution? No. But this is what we can do. This is what I can do, right? And so I think that all of us, each of us, no matter who we are, what we're doing in our life, we just should ask ourselves, what can we do to contribute to the good, improve the bad, and change the ugly? So thank you for listening. I'm definitely hoping that you have some questions, and happy to chat with you guys. Thank you. And so how does this work? Anybody that wants to ask a question?
Just raise your hand if you have questions.
Or a comment? Yes.
Prioritize what you do.
I'm sorry?
How do you prioritize what you do?
Right, how do we prioritize what to do? So we are looking for the opportunities of those drugs that are easy and safe to give to people, that have really good activity. So if there are drugs that that work like this magic cancer bullet for many years, there are drugs that work for extend the life of somebody for 1 month, right? So we are looking for the opportunities. What is the best investment for our effort? And then we go after the drugs. When we started with CML, and we started, because CML was Max's disease, and because CML had this one drug. So then we want to get the whole portfolio of drugs that treat that disease. And so now we work on 4 or 5 different disease areas within cancer that have a suite of treatments that we can actually bring to patients. And it's a really good question.
And on the population side, how do you know that there's way more people than probably where you can help that need the help, right? So you can only help a subset of them?
We, in the countries, so the question is what population do we help? Do we help all the people, right, in these countries? We help the type of agreements we have with the companies. We have to ask our donor companies to give us drug. And we assess the need. We assess how many patients we think are going to come. And so we ask for that amount of drug. But it's our physicians that are the hub through which the requests come on behalf of the patients. And so our goal is to never turn a patient down. And so that's what we strive for. There are a lot of, the biggest problem is there are a lot of patients that have cancer and they're not diagnosed. And so they don't get to the cancer center. And that is the biggest sort of bottleneck, I think. Thank you. Yes?
I'm curious to know more. You mentioned many barriers to cancer treatment, including, or what level of involvement does the Max Foundation have in case management? For example, the guy who doesn't have the bus there, or is the focus really on the provision of drugs, or is there more?
It's a really great question. So, because sometimes the challenges and the effort that is needed to bring the drugs has a tendency to take over our conversation about, at any point in time we have, 30 or so shipments going around the world and trying to get through all the obstacles. But the core of the Max Foundation is providing emotional support, education, and wraparound services to patients. So those people that we have, our colleagues in the countries, are constantly organizing workshops. And we have, with people like Hisham, who, this was something that happened to us when we started. We never thought about emotional support and education. We were all about giving the drug. And way from the beginning, we started receiving calls from patients that had been helped by us, who were saying, I was just dying and you saved my life. And now I have to do something different with the rest of my life, and you have to help me. And so we started very early on in the early 2000s, helping patients in their own country get together and forming local patient organizations. So we have been involved in the establishment of about 40 different local patient organizations, and through them we do a lot of building capacity and supporting them, because they are the ones that are supporting sort of peer-to-peer support in the countries, which I think is the most, is as important as the drug that is coming. Especially when patients have to stay for many, many years on a treatment. And the only place and the only place where they can talk about their disease is within the confines of the patient group. So those patient groups are very important. Thank you. Yes?
One of the bricks on the wall was about gender.
Yes.
I'm curious if you have come across innovative ways or effective ways to address that issue in certain countries to gain access for female patients.
I think is working with the males in the family and educating. There was I think it's in Saudi Arabia, the breast cancer group was getting nowhere trying to get women to do preventive care until they started doing it to the males of the family. They told them they also could have breast cancer, and so they started creating these preventive clinics for males, and so then through them, they, people were not so scared and allowed the women to also go to the clinic. But it is a lot to overcome. And we are no one to come and change cultures, and I think we have to be very respectful of the cultures where we're working. So. Thank you. Yes? Yes?
So it's been, about 30 years since Max passed away, and then about 20 years plus with the organization. So you've learned a ton about that wall you created. If you had to think about the group here, if they could loosen a brick in that wall and change something, is there one that you would pick, or a couple that you would pick to think like, people here and people on the ground at work, something they could actually do to change one of those bricks?
That's a really great question. So did everybody hear that? Do I have to repeat? Yeah. Okay, so what would be the one thing? I'm very biased because I have my next urgent problem that I'm trying to solve now. And it all comes down to resources at the end of the day. So one of the countries in the ugly list, Mozambique, is a country where no one is able to have access to treatment. And then last year, a group of MD Anderson doctors came, and so one of our colleagues went with them to the cancer center there because they're going to try to start building the infrastructure to treat cancer. And we found 80 patients that need our drug, that are sitting there waiting for this drug. Now we are ready. We worked the whole year to make sure that we were able to bring the drug to them. Now we have the drug, now we don't have the funds that we need, which is not that much, but we need some funds to be able to build the infrastructure to give it to them. So I am very biased because I am desperate, because I think there's no reason these patients are going without treatment. And And so that's the thing that is in the top of my list.
Just like
But
the last step, basically funding for the last step.
yeah, yes, I mean, there's a whole infrastructure. It takes about $3 a patient a day to give them their medicine. So about $1,000 a patient a year to give them a $30,000 treatment that can save their life. We have the $30,000 treatment. We don't have the $1,000 per patient per year. So, it is, I think that, and, that's what I think that in our world, we all have, different ways to help. Follow. I would love it. Everybody here follows the Max Foundation and our news and can sort of come along in our journey. I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you. Yes?
So is your organization just providing oral chemotherapy, or do you do both IV and oral?
At this moment, we are providing almost exclusively oral medication. My supply chain guy is sitting here, so he's in charge of all these shipments, and we have one drug that is not oral, but of course it's a lot easier to actually provide medication, especially medication that doesn't need to be at cold temperature, because the shipments and the custom clearance events take a long time. But we're working to expand. We're definitely working to expand. I mean, that's one of the things. So we have created this massive infrastructure. We have created supply chains into 120 cancer centers in the world. So now that's our next question. What do we do next? What else can we do now that we have put all these systems in place? What other treatments can we bring? Thank you. Yes?
Another one of the breaks in the wall was not having access to diagnostic tools for maybe more targeted treatments. Is that something that you provide with the organization, or mostly, is that still something that needs to be worked on? You mostly provide treatments that don't require, finding a genetic mutation?
Right. We found out many years, maybe 10 years ago, that diagnostics was a huge problem. And that was another of those moments when I thought to myself, this is not possible, that we have the treatment and we don't have the diagnostics. So Jerry Radish, sitting there from the Hutch, told us about Cepheid, the company that's making some of the diagnostics. And so we went to them. And so I have an agreement with them where they give us preferential pricing for their diagnostics. And we have been working with the different countries to provide the reagents. And in the most part now, we actually donate a lot of the tests as well, because they're still expensive and people still cannot afford them. So we work closely with the Hutch. It's such a big mountain wall of issues that we have to overcome, but we're making progress. We definitely are making progress, and we can only just keep chipping at the wall. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm curious about the pharmaceutical companies. Are they selling drugs in some of the middle-income countries, for example, where you're working, and how do you discern who meets program requirements or?
Right. So the question is about the pharmaceutical companies, and are they trying to sell the drugs in the same countries where we're working? For the most part, one of the breaks was how they don't register the drugs. In most countries in the world, they don't register them, so they don't commercialize them either. So we take first that set of countries, and we say, okay, you don't have commercial interests. So to the extent that we can find patients and safely treat them, allow us to treat these patients. So those are the first. And that is easier than the middle-income countries. The middle-income countries are the hardest because companies want to commercialize their products. And we have worked with them to try to have some kind of access programs where they either lower the price or the government purchases some of the treatment and the company donates some of the treatment and all sorts of arrangements. But the middle-income countries are the hardest of all because private insurance is not very, prevalent there. Most people don't have. These drugs are very expensive. Even when governments want to start buying, then at some point they run out of money and then decide that they can't buy anymore. So it's a constant sort of struggle.